Reports of flying saucers are nothing new. From the beginning of recorded time, men have been seeing unexplainable things in the sky.
One of you told me the other day about the saucer, the flying saucer. Someone said that word before it became in movies or something.
Yeah.
And we had the public hearing where they just summary that this was up. Anyone wanna?
Yeah. Kenneth Arnold in 1947, 2 months before Roswell, was looking for a downed cargo plane in Mount Rainier. He saw this kind of
saucer skipping or something.
Saucer skipping. It was they were in a flying V formation. But yeah, I think the point of that was in culture, the word flying saucer was not derived from fiction. It's the other way around. It was like our depiction of aliens and flying saucers were derived from people's real-life stories, not the other way around. And that's always a misconception about. Yes, but this is an important conversation. I don't know if you have an opinion on this, but books like American Cosmic by Diana Pasulka and Passport to Magonia by Jacques Vallée do talk about how the noble mythology of the time, whether it's the religion or media, do play somewhat of a role in sort of shading how you recollect an experience. So the classic example is Betty and Barney Hill in 1961. Outer Limits was a CBS show that had played 11 days before that abduction experience, and it showed aliens with eyes that wrapped around the rims of their head And that's exactly what they sort of described.
Yeah, analytical overlay. It's almost like we discussed before, where you had witches sitting on the chests of people feeling paralyzed in medieval times. It's like, our overlay is this classic alien kind of motif, but like you look at what they said before, the same phenomenon basically. Their analytical overlay is different, so they describe it as different classes.
Right. Leprechauns, fairies, elves, angels, demons.
We just superimpose our own reality onto the thing.
Yeah. It's almost like you have like a meme library in your head, and then you have this higher Platonic thing that's happening, and you attach the closest meme that you can to it.
Yeah, exactly. People have been seeing the same stuff. Like, so the Tic Tac of today was the flying butane tank of the 1950s, and you can find declassified Air Force OSI reports that are publicly searchable right now that talk about these like flying white butane tanks.
Right.
And the Foo Fighter phenomenon in World War II. And then if you were to go way back, you see stuff that's basically described the same in antiquity as well. So whether it be extraterrestrial, some other kind of origin, crypto-terrestrial, some of the other stuff that people postulate. We deserve to understand, truths of the universe, and if we have answer one of life's questions, right? What happens when we die, and are we alone? We can answer one of those, but it's kept in secret because they believe the public can't handle it, or it hinders this, Cold War arms race that I talked about in my first public interview. That seems pretty messed up to me.
What the fuck?
What do you think about elite interest in the topic? So the Rockefellers funded Stephen Greer in the 90s.
And John Mack.
And John Mack.
Yeah.
And they funded the Princeton Parapsychology Lab. Then you have Chris Mellon, who's a Mellon, obviously sort of interested in the subject. I think there are letters between Lawrence Rockefeller and Hillary Clinton in the 90s where he's sort of pushing for disclosure.
That's right, because I think was David Rockefeller also involved in that? And it was like a Camp David meetup. In the 90s.
And she's holding a book by Paul Davies, Are We Alone? And there's a photo of that, and it's wild.
Certainly, if you use the Rockefellers as the most prominent example, there's certainly called Old Mud. Elite interest, and maybe it's because of their interest in frontier science, or who knows. I've never talked to the Rockefellers. I have no idea what spurred that interest on, but they were certainly pushing for transparency on the issue, and that's one of the most influential families in America, right?
It is important in any scientific process to try to maintain the null hypothesis for as long as possible. And actually, he wrote a Structure of Scientific Revolution, talks about this, and he was friends with John Mack, who was the head of the Harvard Psychiatry Department, who tried to maintain a null hypothesis and say, I don't think this is real, because he was actually a private clinician. He started to see people who would bring up these alien encounters. And I think the thing that's really important for people is just the amount of credentialed people that once they start to have an open mind and actually genuinely inquire, and usually these people start to take it seriously.
Yeah.
Like I have a good friend, Eric Weinstein, who's he's a pretty well-respected public intellectual. I used to just wax poetic. Hey, look, like, this is real. I promise you this is real. And he used to think, I think his quote is like, this is the one area where you had brain damage.
You would not come off at this point, and I was convinced that you were brain damaged on this one issue. No, you really was.
And now, I think, he oscillates, but he's pretty deep into the history to the point where he's bought in that this is at least something worthy of investigation.
Yeah, there's certainly some scholarship there, whether it be Jacques Vallée or, Dana Pasulka recently.
And Jacques Vallée built the earliest version of the Internet, ARPANET, or he helped it, Doug Engelbart, and is a serious astronomer. People have serious background.
I was a really hardcore Intel guy working on some of the hardest, most deep black stuff. And I didn't really think much about UFOs, but then I started looking into it. I have, people in tears, naval officers, pilots, etc., wanting to tell me what they literally saw, and, either a lot of people are having psychological breaks. There's a lot of weird weather phenomena that manifest themselves in physical, tangible, metallic-looking craft that are close. That seems crazy to me, and I'm like, well, these people deeply believe what they saw, and I have to take them seriously, so we need to figure out what this phenomenon is.
Carl Jung wrote a book about flying saucers. The book is called Flying Saucers, and he talks about flying saucers as the kind of mandala, the Sanskrit symbol of psychic completeness. And it's this proto-psychological desire for us to, have this kind of revelation of, knowing everything all at once. And what was crazy about it is he wrote the book, and he was like, this is just kind of a symbolic psychological archetype. And then afterwards, he became convinced that the phenomenon was actually real.
There are things flying around up there that we haven't fully identified yet. Roswell's a very interesting place with a lot of people that would like to know what's going on.
There's footage and records of objects in the skies that we don't know exactly what they are.
We saw a bright light appear in the distant western skies.
Okay, at this point in the video, you might be thinking, there's actually a decent amount of evidence for UFOs. So why are people so reflexively and often smugly dismissive of the topic?
No to predictions, no to aliens.
Well, on the one hand, it's a fair reaction. There are a multitude of profit and attention-seeking charlatans in this space. People who have absolutely no interest in pursuing truth, who embellish stories and sell snake oil for a living. And then, of course, you have your counterintelligence crew throwing constant smoke bombs and trying to confuse you and throw you off the trail. But maybe the most important point when discussing the insane stigma around UFOs is that some of the biggest, most prominent skeptics over the last 50 years, the people who've done more damage to open research on the topic than anyone else, were, you guessed it, from the atomic program. The same atomic programs Dave is saying are responsible for initially studying UFOs and then establishing their secrecy.
I find it really interesting that you have some of the most prominent debunkers, guys like Menzel, guys like Condon, H.P. Robertson, who were kind of big shots, who also worked on the Manhattan Project. Condon was involved.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Oh, yeah. He worked with Vannevar Bush a lot.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Edward Euler Condon was a mid-century quantum physicist, and no single person is more responsible for the marginalization of UFOs than this man and his famous Condon theory. This 1966 investigation into UFOs was paid for but supposed to be uninfluenced by the Air Force. But we now know that Condon was actually coordinating closely with Air Force officials like Colonel Robert Hitler, who had expressed clear written desire that all previous UFO research be shown as a waste of money. The Condon Committee's report dealt a death blow to UFO research in the second half of the 20th century. The backstory here is that Condon was very deep in the world of atomic secrets. Not only did he study with Robert Oppenheimer under Max Born in Germany together in the 20s, he's sometimes credited for helping Oppenheimer pick Los Alamos as the site of the Manhattan Project. Condon knew the area well, having grown up around the corner in Alamogordo. He also recruited a lot of the project's early staff and wrote the Los Alamos Primer, a document all employees had to read before arrival. Then, in 1946, Condon helped draft the McMahon Atomic Energy Act, which again, Dave is literally saying establishes the framework for UFO secrecy.
The McMahon Act of 46, which was the predecessor to the Atomic Energy Act of 1954, the guys that were involved in Manhattan were overlaying the same ecosystem of secrecy and some of the same ways to protect stuff as they were protecting our nuclear secrets.
So Condon was probably clued into high-level UFO secrets from the start. And how many people were deterred from studying UFOs because this one high-prestige quantum physicist told them it was a waste of time? So was Condon just an insider who knew the truth behind UFOs? And was he used by the original atomic UFO program and by the Air Force to downplay it?
Bob Lazar said he worked at a secret facility near Groom Lake where alien technology was being reverse engineered.
Do you think Bob Lazar is full of shit?
Bob Lazar is by far the most famous case of somebody who publicly claims to have secretly worked on reverse engineering UFOs. He outed himself in 1989, and since then has remained remarkably consistent in his story, even while detractors cite that he possibly faked his educational credentials at MIT.
He ended up actually recently going on Joe Rogan, and it's still like this bizarre split where like so many people are like, he was right, and people are now using your testimony to say he's totally vindicated, and then the verdict's still out, because a lot of ufologists or UFO people that I really respect are just pretty skeptical. So I don't know if you have a take.
I mean, I'm certainly different than him. I came at it from a different angle. I have no information on Bob Lazar. It wasn't in the scope of my looking into it kind of activities. If he actually ever experienced what he experienced, I literally have no idea.
Honestly, I go back and forth on whether Bob Lazar is telling the truth all the time. On the one hand, the guy sells illicit chemicals on a sketchy website, invested in a brothel, and seems like a petty con man and criminal. But on the other hand, he definitely has some engineering prowess. He strapped a jet engine to the back of his Honda. He may have actually met with Edward Teller, and he probably did do some work at Los Alamos. Finally, his story just seems so consistent. He really doesn't seem like a guy who thinks he's lying.
There's just a lot of weird stuff about the Bob Lazar story. His story's been absolutely consistent since the late 1980s.
It's a classic intelligence tactic to give people 95% correct information and 5% false information. You can track the flow of information by the uniquely false details, and you can easily discredit the leak. Bob Lazar would hang around some interesting characters, guys like John Lear, who flew cargo planes for the CIA in the 70s. Lear definitely seemed to spread disinformation in other cases. He was also the son of Bill Lear, inventor of the Learjet, who may have been involved in the original UFO program. My question is, did John Lear manipulate Lazar into spreading a bunch of pure disinformation? And so Lazar's claim that he worked on UFOs was all a complete lie? Or was Lazar just a disclosure test for Lear and others around him? Let's see how the public reacts to this guy. He's easy to discredit, but mostly telling the truth. Personally, I'm not sure what to think and would love to meet Lazar myself and ask him what he meant when he told Jacques Vallée about the liquid he was made to drink and the memory lapses it caused, and about his relationship with John Lear.
There's probably a small contingency out there that says the U.S. needs to maintain primacy. You have this exotic tech that we've found, in the case of whatever actions that have occurred. We don't know exactly what to do with it. Maybe we made more progress early on than we have now. We need to kind of refresh the talent pool and maybe out ourselves as a program and front-run immunity, through legislature to do that. What do you say to those people?
Yeah, because that's something I tried to espouse on News Nation. I can't remember how they edited it or whatever, but it actually hurts national supremacy to keep it obtusely secret.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
You can't even bring the right people on it. Say the best theoretician in